Political editor Chris Uhlmann, who's with him now.
Thanks, Beck. Josh Roddenberg, welcome.
Good morning.
Now, we're sitting just off the Cabinet room where, over the course of the last 15 months, momentous decisions have been made which have affected the lives of every Australian. Is there anything that stands out for you in that time?
Well, certainly the decision around JobKeeper, Chris. We were working virtually last year, like so many Australians were because of the health restrictions, but the decision that the Morrison government took to put in place that $90 billion program, a $1,500 a fortnight wage subsidy, helped stem the tide of job losses, helped bring more security to people's work and gave the country a great deal of confidence to come through this pandemic.
Now we have to work our way out of that crisis. How will your budget on Tuesday make people's lives better?
Well, the budget's all about securing the recovery because it's a pandemic budget. We're still in the middle of the pandemic. You've seen the terrible images and events in India. We saw a recent lockdown here in Western Australia, and we know that the virus has many different variants, so it's still a great threat. It's still very much around us. So the budget is about ensuring that people stay safe with a series of health measures. It's also about ensuring more people get into work because we've got the unemployment rate down to 5.6%, but we want to drive it back to where it was at the start of this pandemic in the early fives and even lower if possible.
Well, the last budget wasn't that long ago. One of the centrepieces of that was JobMaker. Did that turn out to be a dud? How many people of the 450,000 that you said would get jobs got jobs?
Well, about 1,000 people have been supported on that program so far. But
out of 450,000 that were promised.
But the key point is that the labour market, Chris, has been a lot more resilient than even our most optimistic forecasts, and that's what has driven us the whole time, to prevent the scarring in the labour market, to avoid the repeat of the 1990s and the 1980s recession. You see, in the 1990s, it took a full decade for unemployment to get back to the rate it was prior to that recession. We're now looking at around 2 years, and other programs like our support for apprentices have been taken up in larger numbers than even forecast.
So what are you going to do to get people employed? JobMaker didn't work. What's it being replaced with?
Well, we have a number of programs. We have support for apprentices. We obviously have the Job Trainer program, which is providing a few 100,000 places for people to get the skills and the training that they need. We'll have other skills programs in the budget. We've got record spending on infrastructure. We've obviously put in place tax cuts with money flowing into people's pockets. That's helping to boost aggregate demand. But we have to understand the situation that Australia finds itself in today. We are the first of major advanced economies around the world to see our employment level get back to where it was pre-pandemic and even above it, with 75,000 people more in jobs today than they were pre-pandemic.
And you've made a decision that you're going to keep on spending to try and drive unemployment down below 4%, to levels which we really haven't seen since the 1960s. Aren't you going to be throwing some good money after bad in that process?
Well, the money that we're spending, firstly, is targeted, and it's based on the best possible advice to government. And it's designed to boost the long-term productivity of the nation as well as boosting, of course, demand in the short term with stimulus measures like tax relief. Our focus is not to bake into the budget long-term spending. We're not seeking to undermine the structural integrity of the budget. Indeed, our record to date has been to front-load a lot of our spending, not to bake it in long-term. But there are going to be some measures in this budget designed to guarantee the essential services Australians rely on.
Well, you rewind to 2017, the Prime Minister who was then the Treasurer, talked about two kinds of debt, good debt and bad debt. Essentially, borrowing to buy the household groceries is bad debt. Borrowing to buy the house is good debt. Essentially, at the moment, you are still borrowing to buy the groceries, aren't you?
Well, he was talking about recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure.
Essentially, that's it. And you are borrowing for recurrent expenditure, aren't you?
There are programs like aged care where people expect more money to be spent. Indeed, we had a Royal Commission which identified greater areas of need, and we'll address that in this budget. Mental health is another area of focus for the Morrison government, as well as ensuring that the NDIS continues to roll out, now supporting more than 450,000 people.
Aged care that you're talking about, childcare that you're talking about,
that's
mental
recurrent
health that you're
spending.
talking about, is all recurrent spending.
That's
so
true.
Essentially, you are borrowing to fund all of that. Isn't that bad debt?
Well, at the end of the day, that is money that needs to be spent to ensure and guarantee a quality of service that Australians need, deserve and expect.
For how long?
Well, again, that sort of money is going to be baked into the budget for aged care, but when it comes to other measures, like some of our infrastructure projects, like some of our skills programs, like tax relief, they're immediate, they're short term, they're not baked in long term.
But over the forward estimates, which is the next 4 years, is there any point at which you stop borrowing to fund programs like that?
Well, we will update the forecasts in budget next Tuesday, but in my EFO, which was the last significant economic statement in December of last year, you actually had net debt peaking at the end of the forwards. We can manage our debt levels today, and we can do so, one, because interest rates are historic lows, and that's the expectation. But secondly, we're growing the economy. And when we grow the economy, the proportion of debt to GDP shrinks.
Don't you think that people find it interesting, though, that when the facts change, you change the facts or the circumstances? Once upon a time, this kind of borrowing was seen by the government as bad debt. Once upon a time, $200 billion worth of debt was seen as a debt and deficit disaster. Now that we're heading towards $1 trillion and you're in government, you've changed the facts. Or changed the way you describe them.
Well, the first thing is there's been a once-in-a-century pandemic.
And we had a global financial crisis, which is why we got debt last time.
And during a global financial crisis in 2009, global GDP fell by 0.1%. It fell last year by 3.3%. You can't even compare the two events in terms of the size and the dislocation that they've caused. We have gone through a once-in-a-century pandemic, the largest economic shock since the Great Depression. Our focus, the Morrison government's focus, has been on preventing the scarring of the labour market and putting a generation of Australians into long-term unemployment. We've succeeded there, but the job is not done. We've got to lock in the recovery, and that's what the budget is about.
But lastly on this, why shouldn't we see it as Labor debt bad, Liberal debt good?
Well, the Labor Party couldn't manage the spending of their programs. The Labor Party couldn't bring the budget back into balance. We had the budget back into balance before the COVID hit. For the first time in 11 years, we've done that before, we'll do it again.
Haven't you, though, shifted who's going to be paying for this onto the next generations? The children of the people who are watching this morning will be paying off this debt forever. And how does that happen without there being higher taxes in future?
Well, again, we've got discipline when it comes to a tax cap, so a tax to GDP ratio, 23.9%, which will stay in place. We've shown ourselves to be the party of lower taxes. The Australian people voted on that at the last election, with the Labor Party promising higher taxes on your superannuation, on your retirement incomes, on your housing, and of course on your income itself. We went for lower taxes, we've legislated and we've passed it. That's been our focus, lower taxes, but the extra spending that we have undertaken during this pandemic has been designed to keep people in work. It's been unavoidable, it needed to be done, and it has helped save the economy.
When do you imagine wages will rise?
When you start to get a tighter labour market, when currently we have some spare capacity in the labour market, the RBA and also Treasury have said when you get down to around 4.5% or lower with the unemployment rate, you'll start to see more competition for labour, and that will help drive wages.
So the RBA says that will be at the end of next year. Is that your expectation?
Well, the RBA have a central forecast of going to 4.5% for unemployment by mid-2023. That's their forecast. We'll print our own forecast from Treasury on Tuesday night.
What about childcare? What are you doing on that front?
Well, childcare, we've committed to an extra $1.7 billion. We're already spending more than $10 billion a year on childcare. Our measures are focused on families that have more than one child
and less generous than Labor's?
Well, we're spending less than Labor's because they're spending on families with more than $500,000.
Sure, but the Treasurer that's heading towards $1 trillion doesn't get to criticise people about their spending, does he?
Well, our focus has been about workforce participation. It is Treasury's expectation that our initiatives on childcare will boost GDP by $1.5 billion a year. We'll see up to 300,000 hours additionally worked every week, and that would be the equivalent of 40,000 people working an extra day a week. That strengthens the economy. We're all about giving families choice.
Well, what about women? Obviously, childcare is one aspect of that and get them into the workforce, but they retire with less super, and the government's been seen as having a tin ear when it comes to women. What are you doing for women?
Well, there's going to be a separate women's statement which will bring together initiatives around women's economic security, women's safety, women's health and women's leadership. There was a women's economic security statement. This is a lot more comprehensive. In fact, you'd have to go back more than a decade to see anything that's equivalent to this.
What are you doing specifically for aged care?
There's going to be a very significant commitment on aged care, but it's reform. as well as additional spending. It's in relation to home care, it's in relation to residential care, it's about governance. Importantly, it's about workforce as well. The skill and the training in the workforce and their ability to provide the services that people expect.
These are big ticket items though, aren't they? Aged care, $10 billion a year was one of the estimates.
It's bigger than that.
Bigger than $10 billion a year.
It is, and you'll have to tune in on Tuesday night to see that. But it's a very significant commitment designed to deal with what the Royal Commission has found to strengthen our system and to ensure that older Australians can retire, can live with dignity, respect and with safety.
What about people who are now coming off the unemployment benefits and JobKeeper that we've seen? Where do we stand now at the moment? Is it much better than the government suspected?
It is. And as you remember, Chris, we were heavily criticised by our political opponents who said that the sky would fall in if we ended JobKeeper after a year. Bearing in mind it was initially a 6-month program which we extended for 6 months. We held firm because that program was costing more than $2 billion a month. And what we have seen in the 1 month since JobKeeper has ended, so in the month of April, is 105,000 people come off income support, the job seeker payment, youth allowance, other, and that is a sign of, again, the enormous resilience in the labour market.
Would you describe this as a snapback?
Well, the RBA has used those terms.
You used to use those terms and you got scared out of it by the Labor Party. So is this a snapback, Treasurer?
Well, this is a very strong recovery, but it's not locked in yet. We're in a pandemic and the budget will ensure that our economy will not only get through this pandemic, but will come out stronger on the other side.
And you won't be leaving your children with a debt burden they can't bear?
We can manage the debt levels. The choices that we took have helped save the economy. It's kept people in work and it's prevented a generation of Australians from being long-term unemployed.
Yeah, and a generation of those Australians too wonder how they're going to get a home. How will they get a home?
Well, we're seeing first home buyers come into the market in record numbers. So the highest level,
more than ever before.
The highest level in over a decade. Our programs, whether they were home builder or whether the initiatives around the first home loan super saver scheme, other initiatives that we've undertaken and expanding in this budget are designed to help younger people and families get into the housing market, including an announcement yesterday about helping single parents with a deposit as low as 2% to get into the market.
Finally, in a sentence in words that people can understand, many people will describe your budget. How will you describe it?
Securing the recovery and keeping Australians safe.
Josh Frydenberg, thank you.
Thank you.